So next Monday, we have a library instruction day. We're going to go, I'm saying, we're going to go into the library. No, technically, Zoe, who is a librarian at SDSU, will come into our Zoom space and she'll talk to us about the library database. We always have such, like we normally have anywhere from 9 to 12 students in our synchronous sessions. And so I'm hoping that she'll be able to give us some exercises to do, some things that we can, like actually do to learn how to use the database. And I will email her about that today, just because we're not 30 students, we have the opportunity to do things that we couldn't do if we had 30 students on Zoom. So that's a bonus. It's gonna be super useful because like Google Scholar is great, and I love Google too. But when we want to find academic sources and be able to narrow the filters, it's very, very helpful to use academic databases. And SDSU's OneSearch gives us access to multiple databases simultaneously. And so she'll talk about how to use that. That will help with the glossary. Any questions about the comments I put on the glossary or the note that I sent out about the glossary yesterday?
I have a question.
Yeah, Emma.
So just to be clear, you don't want us to find definitions from other like websites. You just want us to find them in the article, like quotes that like back up like what the meaning of the word is.
Primarily, yes, Emma. I want you to look at literature. And by literature, I don't mean, like novels and fiction, but when we refer to academic literature, it is the research on that. So primarily, you're going to be using the literature on a topic to pull definitions. That's what scholars do generally. Zoe will also introduce some academic dictionaries. These are very, very discipline specific, and she will show you how to find those. What I don't want you to do is go onto Google and say color blindness, and then pull up whatever dictionary definitions that show up in a Google search. Because those, you're going to get some that are very credible, but you're going to get some that are less credible. Does that make sense, Emma?
Yes.
I know it's kind of a weird because it's a yes and this too answer. So yeah, it's a little complicated. That's what I did with the UNESCO definition, because UNESCO is a very credible organization, and so I could get that definition for literacy, which was really, really valuable, and it helped us narrow the scope. So when I say literacy, you know what I'm meaning. It's means of communication, not just textual communication in standard English, but multilingual, multicultural, um, multimodal. Those are the multiliteracies that the New London group talks about. And I'll throw in a definition for that because I believe Barron and Grimm talk about multiliteracies, and that is defined by the New London group. And so that's oddly enough what Callie Linford was talking about at the end of her article, although she had never read the New London group at that point in time. Incidentally, the New London group is not from London. It's from New London, which is in New Hampshire. And it's a group of scholars, literacy scholars from a variety of disciplines. So, any other questions about the glossary based on the comments I sent out or the comments that I put on your glossary?
Sorry, I just have to clarify one more thing.
That's okay.
Um,
Thank you, Emma.
so for this next submission, are you looking for us to just like add more quotes? Like, what do you want us to change?
I want, okay, so and some of you have used vocabulary words instead of discipline-specific terms that help you understand the topics that Barron and Grimm, the conversations about diversity and literacy education that Barron and Grimm have entered into. So some of you are going to be taking words out of the glossaries. I do hope you will find additional definitions for terms like colorblindness or diversity or multiculturalism. I want you to start looking at synonyms. For example, mainstream and dominant and monocultural all speak to the same concepts about um, homogeneity in the university, um, which is systematic. I mean, do you see how so many of these terms are referencing similar ideas? And I want you to make those connections as you're exploring it. So you might have multiple definitions for colorblindness or mainstream or diversity. So you're defining, but then you're expanding the definition. So I imagine that there would, I've said this multiple times. I imagine that you would find multiple definitions. And so Emma, let's say you put a definition for color blindness, and there are multiple definitions in Barron and Grimm, but most of the glossaries got one. So let's say, Emma, you put a definition there, then somebody else, Elia or Alex, could add another definition from Barron and Grimm or from the new article that I put in there by, there's 3 people and I can't remember all their names. So I'll just say it's navigating conversational terms. We're doing preliminary work to help us understand the conversation. We can't join the academic conversation until we understand it. And that's the goal here. Did I answer the question, Emma? I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I think it's more clear for me now. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a complicated assignment. And I'll be honest, this is the first time I've done this type of work in this way. And so if it feels like almost like I'm making it up as I go along, it's because I kind of am. And let me explain why I'm developing this assignment. By the way, anytime I use a class as guinea pigs, they all get the benefit of the doubt as we're figuring it out. Let me tell you why. Um, Research is hard. Joining an ongoing academic conversation is something that we don't necessarily do in high school classes. And so I've seen students struggle to understand the conversations that are going on in academic literature. And so instead of just throwing students into the conversation, I'm saying, let's step out a little bit and let's look where those conversations are going, where Barron and Grimm are joining other conversations and identifying those conversations and understanding what they mean by those conversations. And so a glossary is a good starting point. And we'll look at least 2 more academic conversations on this topic. You'll see the one from Navigating Conversational Terms. You'll see that it was published, I believe, in 2006, so a little bit later. And we'll look at another one that's after that. I'm weighing between two of them right now. I want you to know, like, what are they responding to? And what are they adding to the conversation? And then the other article, what are they responding to and how are they adding to the conversation? Because ultimately, you're adding to the conversation. That's what academic writers do, which is why this title is continuing the conversation. So Emma, thank you for asking those questions, because they really helped me address some things that I don't think I made completely clear. By the way, if you have a copy of the slide deck, you'll see that there's a link there. And let me give you this link. Let's see. I want to share this with you. And let me put this in the chat, because there are some readings in here, the slide deck is in here, and there's a form in there that you're going to be working on in breakout rooms. So now you have a copy of all the things that I'm using today. I say a lot. This is Teresa Toney, and this is her first convention or characteristic of academic writing. She says academic writers respond to what others have said about their topic. And two quotes from Toney kind of set the tone for what I'm talking about when I say joining a conversation. She says, when academics write, they join a conversation, and to show they understand this, they refer to what others have already written about their subject. That's why pulling definitions from, or clarifications or examples from existing literature allows you to do the work that academic scholars do. And incidentally, you might think that this is a pretty basic assignment, but no, it's a complicated assignment. When I did my master's program, this is exactly what I had to do. I had to understand, I had to identify the terms that the scholars were using, because in graduate programs, professors just throw you in and expect you to figure everything out. And this is the basic work I had to do. It was like, what are the terms? What are they expecting me to understand and know and define automatically? And who are those people they're quoting? Because I have no idea. And so I had to do exactly this work. That's going to happen to you when you start taking some upper division classes. And I know some of you are going to be doing that sooner than later. Toney also said that when you're an academic writer, which is what you are when you're writing in a class like this, or in a poli-sci class, or a sociology class, or a history class, or, by referring to what others have said about a topic, writers accomplish two things. That is, you are a writer. They show that they're addressing an issue that matters and that there's more to be said on it. So you're showing, hey, I know what I'm writing about. This matters. So Barone and Grimm are exploring a variety of topics in their essay: diversity, multiculturalism, anti-racism, racism in the university, racism in literacy education, in the Writing Center. What are some other conversations that they join? Topics that they're exploring. You can put them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself. Hannah, what's a topic that they join? what is the main topic that they're addressing in this research article?
I'm not sure if it's like the main topic, but they also dive a little into color blindness.
Yeah, they do. It's important that they do that because a lot of the lessons that they pull um, demonstrate the effect of color blindness on the tutors in their writing center, most of whom are white. Um, yeah, they're looking at racism in the writing center, the importance of diversity in the writing center, why diversity is important to literacy. They're also exploring the importance of training on diversity in a largely white writing center, um, or the challenges of addressing diversity in a university setting, a writing center setting, in literacy education. It's just, those things that we're getting at are kind of the key, and that's what we ended up in the chat, is like the synthesizing of the topics that I put on the screen. And I like how we're getting at that, like that, what is the big topic they're addressing? They're exploring the challenges of a beginning racial conversations about race in a largely white writing center. Yeah, it's super, super hard because, gosh, I never, like all my undergrad, I never encountered a conversation about race. I was going to university in the 80s. And so that's, like that's a really long time ago, but we just didn't have conversations about race. And we had very few conversations about race in my grad school either. And that was in the 2000s, the late 2000s. And, like now we are having those conversations. And Barone and Grimm started this in the early 2000s. And it was awkward for them. They realized how far they had to go. And so that's a big thing that they're talking about. This week, and I've already alluded to this, you're going to read another research paper that joins this conversation. And, I think that this one is a little more challenging to read than Barone and Grimm. But it's joining that conversation about how difficult it can be to have these types of conversations. And that is something that Barone and Grimm address. And so you're going to see them talking about some very similar ideas. They're going to talk about color blindness. They're going to talk about the difficulty. They're going to talk about racism. Um, I don't know, Barone and Grimm never talk about anti-racism. Um, how do you all define anti-racism? Or is this a new term for you? You can put it in the chat. That's always helpful. It allows you to, like think about it, write it down. Just curious, how many of you have not heard the term anti-racism? Let me stop share. Let's talk about that. Because I haven't really used it in this class. How many of you can just raise your hand. How many of you have heard of anti-racism? Okay, Alex and Kiana have. And Alex, can you define it, or Kiana, or
I would say it's like going past kind of identifying racism and talking about like the definition terms, and to instead like referring to action against racism, and like how diversity is important, and kind of going towards like a form of action instead of just like informing.
I think that's a really good way to put it. Alex, is there anything that you can add to that?
Nothing much, just kind of instead of being a bystander, kind of doing something to actively stop it, not just being okay with it or letting it go.
Yeah, I think that those are, that is good. Hannah, I know your hand was up briefly. Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I did agree with a lot of what Kiana said. It's not really being not racist, but actively identifying racism and being like, yeah, actively against it.
Yeah, I like how all three of you speak to action. It's not just identifying racism or choosing not to be racist, but it's actively working against racism, actively looking for where there is racism, and then finding ways to work against it, to eliminate it, to mitigate it, to create transformations and change. And some of those, Barone and Grimm talk about personal transformation. In later works, Grimm acknowledges, I mean, they talk about systematic oppression and systematic racism in the text, but they're focused on personal transformations that they might affect in the writing center with their tutors. And I think anti-racism is largely, like personal transformations are valuable, but my personal transformation might not be sufficient to actually make a change. And so it's finding those systematic things, what procedures or policies or practices in an institution need to be changed, and how do we change them? And so activism, as Kiana and Hannah and Alex all pointed out, is part of that. Yeah, it's an important thing. And so I don't know if the term anti-racism was even used in 2002, but it's clear that anti-racism is at the core of what Barone and Grimm are talking about. At least on some level, productive diversity could be a form of anti-racism. So Thank you. I hadn't planned on talking about that. I planned on talking about a lot of other things, but I think this was important to touch on. Let me go back to this. Yes, navigating conversational terms. Still, they're not going to use the term anti-racism. Again, I don't know when that term began. Also, your next essay is joining this conversation as well by examining your literacy journey through the lens of a theme in Barón and Grimm, and that will be important. I think this is Nancy Barón, not absolutely sure, but that is Nancy Grimm. They make claims about color blindness. They make claims about the effect of mainstream or mainstream policies or mainstream curriculum. You're going to have to find a theme and examine that and interpret it through a lens. I want to talk a little bit more about using a lens. I think a few of you have read the prompt already. Any questions about the prompt if you have read it?
I had a question. For the last essay, you also provided a rubric. Will you be doing that this time?
I will. It should be up by the weekend.
Perfect. Thank you.
I know. I end up with extra projects. Not really sure how that happens, but it was nice to take a couple days off. So, any other questions? So let's talk about lenses. I wear glasses, and I'm grateful for my glasses because what I see when I take the glasses off is very different than what I see when I put my glasses on. It changes what I see and the way I see it. How do lenses work? Because in order to understand how an academic lens works, it's important to think about that because basically we're talking about a metaphor. So how do lenses work? You can put it in the chat or you can just, and we're just talking about lenses, camera lenses, glasses lenses, any kind of lens. What are characteristics of lenses? They focus on certain things, yeah. Let me go back to that image. Yeah, they focus on certain things. In this image, we see there's a lot out there, but by looking through the lens, we just see one small piece of the scene that is in the background. And what else? What is the effect of focusing on certain things instead of something else? You can make connections throughout the work, yeah. So Paul Skorupskis, who I'm sure I've said his last name incorrectly, he could have focused, I mean, this lens is focusing on where the two mountains come together. He could have put the lens on any part of that background scene. But by focusing it right there, he's making us look at the clouds. He's making us look at the shadows. He's making us see that part instead of everything else surrounding it. It captures and focuses on details we might not have noticed. And it gives us, we can begin to think about those specific details instead of other details or general ideas. And it gives us clarity on that piece as we focus in on that piece. So using a lens to view our examples allows us to, this is a magnifying lens, camera lens is what he's using. But if this were a rose-colored lens, we would see something, like it would change the color of it. We would see other things. Barone and Grimm talk about Black's quotes about, and I forget who Black's, I forget Black's first name, but they begin to analyze the Black writing coach's experiences, the reluctance to share her story. They analyze it, that episode, that anecdote, that narrative through the lens of Black in order to draw conclusions, reasons why the Black writing coach was reluctant. Because otherwise they were left going, why is she doing that? And so by analyzing through the lens of Black, we can gain greater understanding. Later on, Barone and Grimm analyze that same story through the lens of Agbu, who wrote about being an involuntary minority. By the way, Hannah did something in the glossary by, she wanted to know more about Agbu, and she went straight to that source because she saw that she could get more information about this concept of being an involuntary minority. That is a great way to do this kind of research. So going to Black's text would lead to other details that Barone and Grimm don't use, as they just pull that other, they just pull that one thing. Great idea, Hannah. I do remember that. What I'd like you to do, dang, we're almost out of time. I wanted you to get a little bit of practice using Ruggiero's discussion about evidence as a lens for analyzing Barone and Grimm. And so I wanted you to go into Barone and Grimm, into the sections where they, dang, 10 minutes is insufficient to do this work, but it's not insufficient to start. So let's go ahead and do this. Let's see. I want you to identify a claim or assertion that authors make in the lessons. They have lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3, lesson 4, and then I want you to start identifying the evidence they use to draw the conclusion you identified. There's more than one type of evidence. And then I want you to identify the type of evidence. I think that is all you're going to have time for. But I think that that is worth doing because identifying evidence is difficult. Also, coming up with the conclusion might be difficult. So let me skip that thing. This worksheet, if you've got the slide deck, you can go straight to the worksheet. It'll have the claim on the left side, the evidence, just a short description of the evidence, maybe the page number, and then the type of evidence it is. Don't worry about the questions you might ask based on Ruggiero. And we'll pick this up again later on. If you click on the link that's in the slide deck, you will get to create a copy of the document, and then you click that and you'll be able to type directly on the document. Okay? Stop share. Questions about what I want you to do. I'm going to put you into 3 breakout rooms, and then I'm going to bring, just do what you can. That slide deck or the folder I sent you includes Ruggiero's text and Barone and Grimm. Okay, questions? Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah,
Do you
Kiana.
have a specific number for each group member, like by now that you want, like how many terms per person?
I forget how many I specified. Initially, it was just 2, and I forget how many you're going to need because I didn't memorize the prompt. But take a look at the glossary and the glossary prompt, and it will have all of that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so assign automatically, make note of the number that you're going into because that's the lesson I want you to look at, okay? Hi, are you all there? Or did my Zoom just freeze?
I'm here.
Okay. What was the hardest? Were you able to access the materials through the folder? This is the first time I've ever used a folder like this.
Wait, which folder?
The folder, I sent you a folder with all the materials right at the beginning of the class.
Oh, was it like the link that you put in the chat?
Yes.
Oh yeah, I was able to access that.
Okay, so all of the articles were in there and the form. What was the hardest? Were you able to start identifying evidence and using that spreadsheet?
Yeah.
Okay. I want to return to this because the ability to identify evidence is really important. And so not on Monday, hang on to the spreadsheet you started. I took note of who was in which room. And on Wednesday, we'll continue this. Okay?
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you. Sometimes it feels like I'm the only one in here. It's very lonely. Zoom is just strange. Yes, I want to be back on campus. Okay, have a really great rest of your week. And I'm answering questions by email if any of you have questions. All right, bye-bye.
Bye.